to welcome Minister O'Dowd to the House. Minister, last year I visited the Occupied Palestinian Territories with Seanad and saw firsthand the impact of the illegal occupation of Palestinian lands and how Israel is using illegal settlements to undermine any real prospect of a two-state solution there. We visited the South Jordan Valley, which is the land, very, very fertile land, very valuable land that runs between the West Bank and Jordan. On one side of the road was an Israeli settlement with lush green plantations running as far as the eye could see, way beyond anything I'd ever seen in this country or anywhere else. All made possible by the installation of expensive irrigation systems to water that land. And the other side of the road, that which was inhabited by Palestinian families, was barren red soil with almost nothing growing in it. When we later met the farmers that live on that land, and we asked them to explain the difference, how literally within 10 feet of each other you could have such different results. They explained that their natural water source, they used to have a spring coming down from the hills beside their farms, had been cut off and diverted away from their land and over to the legal Israeli settlement across the street, leaving them not only unable to actually support their livelihoods in farming, but also without access to clean water. This story is repeated all over the occupied Palestinian territories. Israel has stolen land and natural resources from the Palestinian people and planted 500,000 Israelis in illegal settlements there. The settlements are then surrounded with huge security apparatus, there's road closures, buffer zones, which mean that Palestinians who used to be able to reach public services like hospitals or other facilities within a 5-minute drive that are just down the road as the crow flies now have to drive 30 minutes an hour to get past all the different road closures and checkpoints before they can get there, and which sometimes results in people not being able to get medical treatment that they need. All of these actions are designed to make life as difficult as possible for the Palestinians and undermine any prospect of a two-state solution. The settlements are completely illegal under international law. Even Israel's closest ally, the US, recognised this, yet they continue to expand. And only earlier this month, the Israeli Housing Ministry outlined plans for another 1,500 settlement housing units in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And the reason that these settlements are viable, Minister, is because they're able to export millions of euros worth of agricultural and other produce that are produced there. Again, as I said, produced on confiscated land from the Palestinians using their natural resources. The EU imports from the settlements is estimated, the value of the EU imports from settlements is estimated at $300 million. And by buying settlement goods, consumers are often unwittingly supporting Israel's illegal occupation of the Palestinian territories and its human rights violations there. The EU has criticised, as has the Irish government, the illegal Israeli settlements, but we continue to accept goods that are produced there. Personally, I think that the EU should ban all goods coming from the settlements. If we really believe that they're wrong, and if we want to stop incentivising Israel from stealing Palestinian land and resources, we should not be taking goods that come from those areas and making them economically viable. But at the very least, we need to ensure that those goods are correctly labelled and that consumers can see when they pick up the packet that it says Israeli produce from the occupied Palestinian territory. And then they can make their own decisions, as Irish people have in the past, about goods from apartheid South Africa and whether they're prepared to actually buy those goods or not. The EU has looked at this issue and it agreed in December 2012 to take action regarding settlement products. Ireland was one of 13 EU states to write to the EU Foreign Policy Chief after that decision, requesting that the EU introduce guidelines on correct labelling of settlement goods, but that still hasn't happened. And it seems we're still waiting for that to happen, whereas the UK and the Dutch governments have gone ahead themselves and acted. So that's why I'm calling a new minister that the Irish government would use its influence at EU level to ensure, preferably, that there would be a complete ban on goods from those areas, but that at the very, very least, that we would ensure that they're properly labelled. And also that the Irish government would follow the example of the UK government by introducing formal advice to Irish private sector companies regarding Israeli settlements, explaining some of the reputational damage of being involved with companies that are based there. And also that the Irish government would exclude settlement products and companies from public procurement. It was actually news to me, Minister, I didn't realise it, that Veolia, that run the Luz, are an Israeli company that does business they're a French multinational, but it provides infrastructure to the illegally Israeli settlements in East Jerusalem. I hadn't actually realised that, but I do think that that is something that should be taken account of by the Irish government in making decisions on public procurement. If we're really serious about human rights, then we should be prepared to stand behind our principles as we did in the past and use the economic power that we have to ensure that Israel has to rethink these decisions, because so far they're just playing what I saw in the West Bank, in Gaza, and in occupied East Jerusalem, was the Israelis are playing a long-term game. They're negotiating on the one hand, while on the other hand doing everything that they can to make life more and more impossible on a weekly basis for the Palestinians, putting in more and more settlements, so that ultimately, whenever it comes, if it does, for an agreement to be reached on a two-state solution, it will be virtually impossible. And I don't think we should be facilitating that. I just think we should be doing everything we can to stop it.
I take this debate on behalf of the Taoiseach, widely absent. The government's position on Israeli settlements has been clearly articulated on many occasions. Such settlements are illegal, in many cases involve the seizure, as Senator Power has outlined, of Palestinian land and resources, and are the cause of the great majority of movement and other restrictions which infringe on the lives and freedoms of Palestinians. Settlements are seriously undermining and are intended to seriously undermine the possibility of achieving a peace agreement. Ireland has therefore consistently argued for a stronger international approach to the issues surrounding these settlements. The business-related aspects of settlements have also been discussed on many occasions in the Oireachtas in recent years. Settlement products are an important issue, but they are a small aspect of the overall problem, not central to the viability or progress of the project as a whole. Most settlements are dormitory communities for people who work in Israel and do not produce anything. Most settlements produce, this is just the way it's written here. Most settlements produce what most settlements produce is fresh fruit, vegetables and herbs, which are largely consumed in Israel and could be entirely absorbed in the Israeli market if necessary. Similarly, the amount of settlement produce entering the EU market is very small, and this bears on the degree of regulation warranted to control it. The key international standards in this area are the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, adopted by the UN Human Rights Council in 2011. This government encourages all Irish businesses to be familiar with and apply these principles in their international activities. The government this week has decided to prepare a national plan on the implementation of the guiding principles coordinated by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. In the specific case of the Occupied Palestinian Territory, the EU has taken a number of actions in relation to settlements, strongly supported by Ireland and Irish governments past and present. First and most importantly, the EU has excluded goods produced in settlements from the lower tariff applied to Israeli goods. Work continues on an ongoing basis to make this distinction more effective and to close any loopholes found, as with any such tariff measure. Secondly, the EU has issued rules to ensure that no EU research grants to Israel are spent in the settlements. Thirdly, the EU has recently ruled that it does not recognise the competence of Israeli authorities to issue health certificates for chickens produced in the occupied territory, and thus these may not be imported into the EU. The EU has also been working on two further measures: guidelines on the labelling of settlement goods and advice to business and individuals on investment in settlements. These measures were not taken forward further during the past year, while direct Israeli-Palestinian negotiations were in progress, as it was felt they may not help the political context of these talks. Ireland consistently supports both of these measures, and since the suspension of the negotiations in May, we have actively raised at EU level the need to resume progress on them. There is now general agreement among Member States to issue guidance on investments. These would be along lines agreed at EU level, but appearing as national advice of the Member States. A number of partners have already issued this advice, and Ireland will do so very shortly. The guidelines on labelling may take a little longer to agree, as this involves many more departments in both Member States and the European Commission. But in any case, the essential point that produce from settlements should not be labelled as coming from Israel is already provided for in EU consumer law. The Taoiseach has stated that if the labelling guidelines are unduly delayed at EU level, Ireland will move ahead with national guidelines. There is therefore a considerable overlap between what the government has been doing and the actions recommended in the Trócaire report mentioned by the Senator. Indeed, the Department of Foreign Affairs is in regular contact with Trócaire and other interested parties on this broad range of issues. However, the report also blurs important distinctions, for instance, by treating as equivalent an investment specifically in a settlement enterprise and commercial links with other companies which themselves may have commercial links with settlements. This is not helpful, and it would seriously undermine our own influence on the issue if we were to follow this logic in discussions at EU level. This point has been made to Trócaire. To conclude, Ireland has strongly supported a range of actions at EU level to make effective our opposition to illegal settlements, and we will continue to do so.
Minister. Brief question now, Senator.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your reply on behalf of the Taoiseach. I welcome the signal from the Taoiseach that Ireland will move to introduce guidelines if it's not done at EU level. I do appreciate that. I suppose I'm just concerned that we've been saying that for a while. We've been saying that since 2012 and it hasn't happened yet, and I would just urge that it will be done as soon as possible. The speech from the Department of Affairs to the fact that the reasons why the EU hasn't been pursuing this issue more vigorously is because negotiations are in progress. Negotiations have been in progress in different formats for a long time in relation to the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And I have to say my view on the current negotiations is that I don't think Israel is acting in good faith. I don't think they could possibly claim to be doing so when they continue to expand more and more settlements all the time like they did earlier on this month. I think if anything they're using the negotiations as a cover for just increasing advancement into Palestinian areas and undermining of any realistic prospect for a two-state solution in the future. So I think we shouldn't play into that game by putting off taking measures ourselves just because negotiations are taking place. We would all hope that the negotiations will turn out well, but I just think that we have grounds for suspicion, unfortunately. The reply also refers to the fact that on labelling guidelines, that as EU law already requires that products from the settlements shouldn't be referred to as coming from Israel. So they don't say produce of Israel, but what they do say is produce of such and such a settlement. And the person reading that, or of such and such an area, the person reading that doesn't know if that settlement or that area is in Israel or if it's in the Occupied Palestinian Territories. I think we need to have absolute clarity, and I think the only way you'll have that is when it actually says Israeli produce from the Occupied Palestinian Territories, so the consumer has absolute clarity. They can't be expected to know the geography of the area that clearly. And I suppose the other issue just that isn't dealt with in the reply, and you might ask, honestly, if you don't mind to respond to me directly on, is the issue of public procurement and Irish state contracts going to companies that are actively involved in the Occupied Palestinian Territories. Thank you.
I want to assure